Hello students, this is the part 3 of the lab, which is the how to model a simple snowman in 3D using basic 3D shapes. Now, I sound like a broken record, but there are many ways to accomplish the same thing, so this is just one workflow that you could use to create a 3D snowman on a surface. Now, throughout the video, I'm going to be showing you some shortcuts because you guys got a lot of practice creating 3D objects and moving them around in the previous lab. I'm going to add on a few more things that you can do to make your 3D modeling faster. So this is our final product, and we are going to make a new document, and we are going to say all files, and we are going to open up a fresh 3D Studio Max file. Okay, so first thing we'll do is we are going to set up a plane which will represent our ground or the floor of our scene. So I'm actually going to create that in the top viewport. I don't have to, but I just decided that's what I want. And of course we can see here that it's not centered, so I'm going to hop over to the Move tool real quick, and I'm going to make my values 0, 0, and 0. Last but not least, since our scene is in the wintertime, we want our ground to be white and covered with snow. Okay, so we can see our sample grid showing through here, and that is totally fine, and that's that. Now, one thing as you are working in 3D Studio Max and you're starting to model scenes, especially as a beginner, it is good to come up with good habits. I say this as somebody who was self-taught. I developed many bad habits early on that as I got more advanced, I had to break those bad habits. So we are going to start off on the right foot. So two things. We've created our plane that's going to represent the ground, and I'm going to have you hop over to this list panel that we're going to start talking more about as we build more complex geometry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on that, and I'm going to rename this to ground. And I am also going to click on the snowflake, which what that does is it stops us from being able to transform it. And as you get further into this exercise, you'll see why this is a good idea, because it's very easy when you're starting to work with multiple objects in one scene that you can sometimes click on what you think is the object you want to be doing, but you click on something else by accident and you end up moving something you didn't intend to. So if we've got this plane set up how we want it to be for the time being, we might as well freeze it in place so we don't accidentally mess it up while we're working on the rest of our scene. So we're building a snowman, so let's make a sphere for the bottom of the snowman, and I'm just going to click and drag and make a simple sphere, and I'm going to make it white, and I'm going to put it in the middle at the origin. Once again, I'm doing this a lot, and there we have it. So at this point, we might want to move it up a tiny bit to sort of make it look a little more realistic. And I have all 4 viewports open because I could move my snowman in either viewport window. It doesn't really matter at this point. I'm just moving up and down. All right, so you could make the next 2 levels of the snowman by making another sphere and dragging it and lining it up and all that, but I'm going to show you a shortcut. So we want to make a snowman which is 3 spheres on top of each other. So what we can do is we can select the sphere in whatever viewport we want, and we're going to hold down Shift on the keyboard, and we are going to drag upward on the gizmo. And what that's going to do is that is going to ask us if we would like to clone the object. Okay, and basically what we do there is now we have a second sphere lined up directly on top, and of course we might want to scale it down, right? Because the second level of the snowman is a little bit smaller than the first. And you can see that while I'm dragging in the perspective viewport on the right, I'm able to watch in the viewport to the left to kind of get an idea exactly how big the two sections are relative to another. Nice. Okay, so now I'm actually gonna use my middle mouse button to click and drag my scene a little bit, because I'm gonna do one more shift drag, and I'm going to clone this one more time, and I am going to scale it down using the perspective viewport, and maybe I'll move the head down a tiny bit. I want you guys to notice that as I move between viewports, before I click on the gizmo, I right-click the scene, and that sort of shifts the focus to that viewport, FYI. Okay, so we're talking about best practices here, and here I am starting off on the wrong foot already. So we have 3 spheres that we've created, and we can see there's sphere 1, sphere 2, and sphere 3. So let's rename the bottom one that we can say, double-click, bottom snowball, and then maybe we'll name the middle one middle snowball, and we can see that as we click on the spheres in the list, the gizmo and the highlight moves to that actual sphere, so that's pretty convenient there. So middle snowball, and of course alright, great. Okay, so now that we have these guys kind of where we want them, and you can get as exact about this as you want, and once again, if we right-click over here, oops, and we orbit around our snowman in the perspective viewport, we can see that that looks pretty good. And once again, that is a useful thing to keep in mind, that while you can see the side view, the front view, the top view in these other 3, the perspective is really great for just getting a quick look around your scene. Alright, so now that we have finished our 3 levels here, we're going to freeze these guys as well so we don't accidentally move them when we start working on the next part of our snowman. So next let's make him a hat. So we could do this one of a few different ways, but for the purposes of this getting started tutorial, we are going to use 2 cylinders. One is going to be really wide and flat for the brim of the hat, and the other one will be a little bit taller. So I'm going to use the top viewport to create the brim of the hat, because I can get an idea of how wide to make it. Alright, and it doesn't look like I'm doing anything right now, but what I'm actually doing is I'm sliding my mouse up and down, and if you take a look at the lower right hand side of the screen under the parameters, you can see the height of my cylinder is changing. So we want a really skinny value for our hat height. Okay, so here's another trick that you can do, because I could move that base of the hat up by using the gizmo, using the move tool, or I could be really fancy and I could use the align tool, and the align tool is up here. And if we do that, we click on this, it's going to sit and wait for us to choose another object in the scene that's going to align it with. So we're going to click on the head of the snowman, and oh, I just learned something new. I can't align it if it's frozen. So temporarily unfreeze it, and now it's asking, we are lining gizmo to gizmo, and watch what happens there. The cylinder has jumped up, and it is partway up the head of the snowman. Still not exactly what we want, but it got us partway there. And then we can decide, that looks good. And then I'm going to make it black, right? Black top hat. So that's the brim of the hat. And then we will repeat the process and make another cylinder. And let's say I get sloppy and I make it over off to the side, and you know, here's my hat. Okay. And I'm going to make it black first. And now I'm like, well, now I've got to get that shape up here on top of the snowman's head, and you know, how am I going to line it up? Well, this is where we can use the alignment tool once again, and this time we can align it right to that brim of the hat, that first cylinder that we created. And there you go. Now, that looks, oops, I just, Control Z, accidentally clicked on that. Alright, so if we zoom in here and we see, because when I made this just now, I kind of don't think that the brim of the hat is wide enough. So I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to show you something we haven't done yet. We are going to go into the other tab. It's called the Modify tab. This is an extremely powerful set of tools that we will be exploring in our next lab. But for this purpose, since I didn't make the brim of the hat wide enough, I'm going to just hop over here and see I can adjust that radius, and I can make the brim of the hat wider from the original radius that I set up when I first set up that shape. Okay, and also, look at that. I can rename it here as well, so I can call it hat brim, and then I can click on the other guy and name it hat. Okay, so I'm going to go and I'm going to freeze both of these too. So now these guys are safe and sound, and I can't do anything with them. And you notice that that black went away, and that is because it's frozen. So anything in the scene that's frozen, it no longer shows up as the color that we intended for it. But that's okay, we're not going to worry about that right now. Alright, so next, let's give our snowman a nose. So we're going to hop back over to the Create, and we are going to find a cone. Right? And we can make this cone anywhere we want, right? And so the first click tells us how wide it is at the base. The second click is going to show how long the cone is, and the last one is going to give it that tapered edge. Alright, and let's make that carrot nose orange. Very nice. And now we have to get that cone lined up with the snowman's head. So let's make sure that we name this right. So we'll name it nose, and then we will hop up here to the align tool, and notice that again, since this is frozen, we have to find it over here in our list, and we can click on the snowflake and it will then snap it right up to here. So okay, well, that's not exactly what we want, right? It's sticking up. So what could we do? Well, we could do any number of different things, but considering what we just learned about, our basic transform tools, perhaps we want to rotate our snowman's nose so that it's sticking out of his face. And maybe we want to move our snowman's nose a little bit out so that now it is sticking out of his face, like that. There we go. Now, in my opinion, that nose is a little big, so we could just scale it down, right? And move it outward again. So depending on how you made your cone when you first started it, you may or may not have to fine-tune it like that, but you can. Alright, so let's, now that we've got that nose where we want it, let's freeze that into place. And we are going to maybe make some eyes and some buttons for him. So we can use a sphere for that. And what I'll do is I'm just going to make a little sphere, pretty small, and I'm going to make it black. Okay. So here we go again. We could move, go up into the front viewport, and we could drag our sphere up here, and then use our middle mouse button to shift our scene, click, drag, that whole business. That could get a little tedious though. What might be a little easier is if we use the alignment tool once again. Oops, gotta have our sphere selected. Use our align tool to get our sphere near the nose, because that's gonna get us in the ballpark of where we want to be, right? So now that we're close to the nose, we can move our eyeball over a little bit up, right? Let's see.